So, welcome to the fourth event of the inaugural Tinworks Art in Conversation series. My name's Mary Stein, and I've had the amazing opportunity to work with the talented staff at Tinworks to develop, ideate, think about, and create this four-part pilot series, Tinworks Art in Conversation, and it's been a blast. It's really been such a pleasure, and I've loved working with Jenny and Angela. Where's Angela? Angela. Oh, she's MIA right now, but here she comes up on the top. But wonderful, talented staff at Tinworks Art. So the origin story about this, I think I'm just going to spend about 2 minutes telling you the origin story about the In Conversation series. It started at a card game. I was retiring from my teaching position at MSU, and I said, gosh, I was hanging out with 3 of my girlfriends and saying, I really want to do something creative. And of course, this is Bozeman, it's a small town. One conversation leads to another conversation. And then I'm talking with folks who are interested in creating this new speaker series in Bozeman. And they say, you should talk with Jenny Moore at Tinworks Art. She is considering this really cool art exhibition, this replica of Agnes Denes' work in the early 80s in New York City, which you're going to hear a lot more about tonight. So Jenny and I got together and started talking, and the synergy was real. It was so fun to develop the speaker series in conjunction with this art exhibition that was coming down the pike at Tinworks. So that's it, and my role in this was basically just curating the speakers for the first 3 series around food and farming, because that's my background is sustainable food systems. So it was super fun marrying my passions around food systems with the amazing vehicle of art in helping folks really relate to these important issues. So thank you, Jenny, Angela, the whole Tinworks team, you're amazing. So tonight, this is our final in the series of conversations. Before I introduce the speakers, I do want to say a big gratitude to our sponsors. You've seen some of their logos flowing on the slide series. The Rialto, our lead sponsors include the Rialto, Gutlawn, the Lark, MSU's Ivan Doig Center for the Study of the Lands and People of the North American West, Root Cellar Foods, Farm to Craig, Quality Foods Distributing, and Happy Trash Can. Those are our lead sponsors for this series, the pilot series. Thank you. Yes, give them a hand. Our supporting sponsors include Gallatin Valley Farm to School, North Fork Financial, MSU College of Education, Health and Human Development, and the Open and Local Coalition. And we've had in-kind sponsorship from Treeline Coffee Roasters, the Emerson Center for Arts and Culture, and the Country Bookshelf. So give our sponsors a big round. Thanks. And so now for our speakers. So I'm going to start with Lauren O'Neill Butler. Lauren is a New York-based writer, editor, and educator whose research includes feminism, artistic labor, class politics, and collaborative practices. She's a co-founder of the magazine November and a former senior editor of Artforum magazine. She's also contributed to Aperture, Art Journal, Bookforum, and the New York Times. In 2020, Lauren received the Warhol Foundation Art Writers Grant, and in 2023, she received the Beverley Art Writers Travel Grant. And she is also the author of an amazing book called Let's Have a Talk, Conversations with Women on Art and Culture, and she's currently writing The War of Art about artist-led activism. So welcome, Lauren. And of course, our second speaker in our pair tonight is the one and only Jenny Moore, who is the inaugural director of Tinworks Art in Bozeman. Jenny will tell you more about Tinworks in a moment, but let me just tell you a little bit about Jenny. From 2013 to 2022, Jenny served as the director of the Chinati Foundation in Marfa, Texas. Under her directorship, Chinati completed Robert Irwin's monumental permanent installation, Untitled, Down to Dusk, organized and made public its institutional archive, and completed restoration of the John Chamberlain Building. She has championed the work of female artists, scholars, and professionals, including Charlotte Posenensky, Bridget Riley, and Solange, and received a $1.2 million grant from Small Start to provide professional development opportunities for women, and particularly women of color, in far west Texas. So without further ado, please welcome our speaker pair for tonight.
Thank you, Mary. So this has been so successful, I'll just say stay tuned, because we've had such a fantastic series of conversations, and we want to pick it up again in the fall. So stay tuned, go to our website and see how we're going to continue the conversation. But as many of you have heard me say, but I never presume, if you're new to Tinworks, we are a nonprofit, inclusive experimental art space located in the northeast neighborhood of Bozeman on the corner of Ida and Cottonwood. Tinworks is located on indigenous land many people have called home before they were forcibly displaced, including the Blackfeet, Crow, Cheyenne, Salish, and Sioux peoples, and we celebrate their presence and celebrate their present and future. This whole series was inspired by this extraordinary human, Agnes Denes, one of our great American artists. And I had the opportunity to invite Agnes to consider one of her iconic works when I was in the process of interviewing for the position at Tinworks, and invited to consider artists who I would love to see represented in this new art space that we're developing in the American West. One of the first artists I thought of was Agnes Denes. And we're here tonight to learn more about Agnes's practice and work, but by now, folks who've been through these series of conversations will know that I have talked about Wheatfield, A Confrontation, which is her very iconic work. In 1982, she planted a 2-acre field of wheat in Lower Manhattan in the landfill that was created from the World Trade Center. And a lot of this is what Lauren's going to talk about tonight. And we're so honored that Agnes accepted the invitation from Tinworks to reconsider that work. It's the first time she's done so in an American institution, so we're very honored. And if you've gone to Wild Crumb maybe in the morning to get breakfast or lunch, or you've gone to Treeline to get coffee and you've looked around the corner, you have seen an acre plus of land that is growing and is flourishing. And we're so thrilled that as an arts organization, our commitment to centering art and artists in this time of change begins with Agnes Denes rejuvenating the land through one of our greatest American artworks. And that we'll certainly have that in conversation tonight. And I want to thank Lauren for joining me in this conversation. We're going to switch up the format a little bit. The other conversations were much more dialogues, but Lauren is such an incredible art historian and author and expert in the field that I'm going to cede the floor to her for a substantial period of time so that she can talk us through a lot of Agnes's work to give a context for her significance and the work that she's been doing in terms of activism and food and art. So I'll leave it to Lauren to get started, and then we'll be in conversation. And also, since we're a small crowd, the question and answer session, be bold. Ask us anything. We are here to foster a conversation. But I really want to also thank all of you all for coming out tonight. It's beautiful outside, and I know you have choices and places to be, maybe up a mountain or in a sunbeam. So we appreciate you coming in to a theater to spend some time with art and great artists. So thank you all for being here.
Great. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Tinworks. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, the Rialto. This is my first time in Bozeman, and I'm already in love with it, so I hope to come back. And I will not be a teacher tonight and lecture off my notes for a long time. I will be short and brief, and then we'll talk, because I do love conversation. I have a whole book of it right there. So, but I want to just give, a sort of biographical sketch and some overview of a slice of Denis's work. I couldn't even possibly talk about all of it. There's so much work, and I'm really going to talk about a very particular slice tonight. This is something that I'm developing into a chapter for this book that I'm writing. So here we go. So the artist, activist, and writer Agnes Denes has long fought independently and collectively for social and ecological justice. Tonight, I'll argue that her work is activist for the ways that it is grounded in getting things done. By actively addressing issues such as food insecurity and climate change, rather than representing or simply describing them. So this is why her work is activist and not just political artwork for me. She's perhaps best known for her ecological works, which she commenced in the late 1960s. Over the ensuing decades, she has been called many things: a visionary, a polymath, and a sage. She has basically carved out an independent, label-free niche for herself and has been occupying it and expanding it for over 50 years, as the New York Times art critic Colin Cotter wrote, I think in 2019. So that's why it's so hard to place Denes in a lineage of land art and environmental art or earth art, whatever you want to call it. I mean, unlike most major land artists, such as Andy Goldsworthy or Robert Smithson or Nancy Holt or Richard Long or Walter de Maria, you might know some of these people, Denes has been more interested in restoration than intervention. So she's not really in a lineage of land art, I would argue. It's more the ecological side, and it's much more the activist side inside of those ecological works. So with a focus on repair and renewal, Denes has avoided contributing to a history of exploiting and manipulating land for financial and commercial gain, as well as cultural capital. In her wake, artists ranging from Betsy Damon and Aviva Romani to Mary Mattingly and Carolina Casido have consistently made artworks that address harms to the environment, often through an ecofeminist lens. And there are many more artists I could talk about in Denes's wake, but here's a few. Denes was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1931. Her family survived World War II and fled for Stockholm in the late 1940s, eventually moving in 1954 to the United States, where they encountered a toxic combination of Cold War paranoia, the nuclear arms race, and a consumerism that stood to destroy the planet. Moving around, coupled with the challenges posed by constantly learning new languages, caused Denes to seek consolation in visual art. She studied painting at the New School and Columbia University in New York, but abandoned the medium due to the constraints of the canvas. She turned to poetry, which she later called visual philosophy, and she continued to be a prolific writer, even still today. For instance, before the wave of treatises on our planet's impending demise, there was her Book of Dust, The Beginning and the End of Time and Thereafter, which was published in 1989. A heavily researched investigation on the death of all matter, written between 1972 and 1987, the book is full of passages that ring clear as a bell today, such as this: the paradoxes of our existence, alienation and togetherness, uniformity and specialization, illusions of freedom and group mentality, ignorance in the midst of information overload, greed in the face of neglect, self-aggrandizement in response to ineffectuality. It is comparable to going into the ice age and the heat wave of the greenhouse effect simultaneously. Typically, each of her art projects begins with a basic equation or a question which blossoms into a diagram or a drawing or an installation that often suggests in some obscure code for some mysterious process of transformation. Her work is driven by an understanding that technological advances, no matter how utopian, are always in danger of becoming tools of oppression. It's as if she wanted to grasp the roots of intricate, abusive systems so that she could understand how to break them apart. And for me, this is perhaps her greatest contribution as an activist. Denes became a co-founder of AIR Gallery in New York City in 1972, a space dedicated to supporting women. Here she is right here with the necklace on. This is a painting by AIR member Sylvia Slay, and she is right there in the second row with in the red top. Although self-identifies as a feminist, Denes didn't set out to explicitly make feminist art. From the late 1960s into the 70s, she was focused on brokering the critical shift from land to ecological art. But it was essential to Denes to keep producing her drawings and prints in her studio too, such as the series, Isometric Systems in Isotropic Space, map projections from 1973 to 79, wherein the earth is wrapped and twisted into trigonomic shapes such as a snail or an egg or a hot dog, and this is one example of, there are many works in this series. Similarly, the drawings in her series Restless Pyramids from 1983, and this is an ongoing series, slough off any rigidity associated with the form, taking the shape of a flying fish, a bird, and a teardrop. While they are an allegory for environmental collapse, Denes, in her most portentous mode, has imagined them as blueprints for post-Earth earth dwellings, easy to repair, self-contained, and self-supporting. Some of her most beautiful writing is about this work. From the start, Denes's large-scale projects have required a living, generative format, which she often found in agriculture, as in her iconic Wheatfield, A Confrontation from 1982, which was commissioned by the Public Art Fund in New York City. Beginning on May 1st, with a small team of unpaid volunteers, Denes planted a shimmering field of red spring wheat over the 2 acres of rubble in Lower Manhattan's Battery Park landfill. And the rubble was from the World Trade Center building. So that was $158 worth of grain on a piece of land then valued at $4.5 billion. The history of this ersatz beach here is a really fascinating topic for another time, but very brief, and this is something I hope to write about very soon, but briefly, this is Battery Park City now, and it was a beach, and there, if you go online and Google, the beach, Battery Park City, 1980s, you'll see some incredible pictures of people hanging out on this beach. It was also a place where a lot of artwork happened. Denes's is certainly the most iconic, I would say also the most important of this time at the beach, but there was dance, and there was performance, and there was lots of other shows. Considering the truly haunting photographs of those amber waves of grain rippling in the shadow of the Twin Towers, which you can kind of see here, but maybe in the last slide you can see it better. It's tempting to read something clairvoyant in this project, some supernatural attunement of violence yet to come. But in truth, of course, Denes didn't need to see into the future to imbue her work with such foreboding. She needed only to comprehend, as so few people did, the course of Anthropocene devastation. This began at an early age. Denes had witnessed needless mass destruction while living underground as a young teenager during the 1944-45 bombing of Budapest at the end of World War II. Wheatfield is teeming with illusions, from its proximity to the historic immigration station at Ellis Island to Denes's particular choice of grain. Critics have compared a very famous photograph of her walking through the field with flowing tresses and a staff as a modern-day Demeter, the goddess of the sheaf. As the artist has said, the work had to have meaning, a strong message, and of course the paradox. A large golden field of grain on land meant for the rich on expensive real estate. Her choice of wheat was also symbolic. Wheat is one of the most grown grains in the US, which exports nearly 50% of its wheat production. Yet, despite being produced in nearly every state, it is not a native grass to the country and was likely first planted during the colonial period. It's also important to note that the work originally transpired on the ancestral homelands of the Lenape, the traditional owners of the land and the waters in Manhattan. And then here, just as an aside, land art in general hasn't been great at acknowledging indigenous ownership over the years. As the artists Marina Hupfield and Jason Lujan have argued, the genre is explicitly connected to an ongoing narrative of conquest and ownership over Native people's land, governance, and bodies. It's also interesting that Denes chose to plant a monocrop, which again speaks to how her project was meant to be symbolic, short-lived, and aesthetically pleasing. But by using just one plant instead of a variety, she restricted the possible biodiversity of the project. We can talk about that more later. Did it hurt a little bit to cut it down? Asked news anchor Jane Pauley during a televised interview with Denes about Wheatfield on NBC's Today Show in August 1982. Denes confirmed, "Oh yes, I lived out there for about 4 months." After 1,000 pounds of the wheat were harvested from the site, Denes gave the hay to the mounted police of New York for their horses and made packets of the seeds, which were distributed across at least 18 cities. In a large traveling group exhibition called the International Art Show for the End of World Hunger. I also want to just note they mentioned the bread basket. Here Denes grew up in at the time Hungary was the bread basket during World War II, and so was the Ukraine. So just to think about, I think it was probably in her at some point to think about wheat being surrounded by that land, but. Okay, so this show, there's barely anything ever written about this. This took a lot of research to figure out about this show. So this was organized by Anna Maria Bozo and Marcia Godowski, and it traveled to cities including Philadelphia, New Orleans, Minnesota, Paris, London, Milan, Rome, Buenos Aires. I think it was like 92 cities that it went to. It's just very remarkable. In addition to Denes, the exhibition featured works by many notable artists, including Joseph Beuys, Louise Bourgeois, Namjoon Paik, Robert Rauschenberg, and Andy Warhol. The project lasted approximately a decade, from its inception in the early 1980s and its debut at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. in 1986, through its final stop at El Museo del Barrio in New York in 1991. In the show, the curators installed images of Wheatfield complemented by Denis's seed packets. The packets were free to take, and the seeds were planted in solidarity and hope. And there are no installation views of this show that I can't, it's impossible. Anyway, it comes as no surprise that after Wheatfield, Denes turned to more durable land reclamations, including Tree Mountain, a living time capsule, 11,000 trees, 11,000 people, the first planned man-made virgin forest in the world, which was commissioned by the Finnish government and announced on World Environmental Day in 1992. To produce the work, Denes invited 11,000 volunteers to plant the equivalent number of a variety of pine trees in the village of Pinsio, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, Finland, forming an upward spiral that tapers towards its peak, a summit of nearly 100 feet. The site, which is about a 2-hour drive north of Helsinki, is lawfully protected against deforestation for the next 400 years. Tree Mountain was intended to restore the land. It was built upon a former gravel pit, along with another work not too far away, Nancy Holt's Up and Under from 1987 to 1998, a sinuous tunnel and berm construction made in a sand quarry. So in Finland, the law mandates that mining companies must repair a completed working site so that it is safe and not a blot on the landscape. And they're, as they are often in remote places, they're prone to trash dumping and other illegal acts, and such is the case nearly everywhere. To avoid any fines, mining companies sometimes suspend operations indefinitely before they deplete the quarry. And they have also used art to meet reclamation requirements, which can be less expensive and less regulated than restoring a quarry to according to reforestation specifications. So the backstory of this is, in the late 1980s, a local arts collective named Strata began advocating for artworks in southwestern Finland and produced an environmental art group show in 1992 at a local museum. Here, this is where Denes presented drawings of Tree Mountain, a project that was then unrealized. Her reforestation plan had been brewing for at least 10 years, and then it gained the attention of a local mining company, which had mined those gravel pits in Pinsio. The company decided to implement the piece. Oops, I pushed it forward, sorry. Let me go back. The initiative soon found additional support from Finland's Ministry of the Environment, which announced plans for its creation. The UN Environment Program then supported the project with a $50,000 endowment. The planned 11,000 trees were to each have a human caretaker. During the inauguration ceremony, the president of Finland planted his tree, and many more trees were assigned other wardens that day. And that local museum also handled the future applications for it. So for example, there's a tree that's designated under the custody of George H.W. Bush, another to Lech Walesa, and another to Saddam Hussein. And so the mountain kind of became a portrait of the political era. And there's a lot more to say about this work and its status today, but I just want to underline that when Denes accepts a commission, she often uses legal contracts to make sure that individuals and governments abide by her plans. Such as this proviso that Tree Mountain will be protected for 4 centuries. implicitly endorsing the idea that our species does have agency in saving itself and the planet. I think that's also implied in the way that she made 11,000 people responsible in a way for this artwork to care for it and steward it into the future. Okay, so back to Wheatfield. 2 later projects by contemporary artists advanced the food activism introduced in Wheatfield and the International Art Show for the End of World Hunger by successfully effecting change in actual food systems. These undertakings also speak to food justice, which includes the struggle against racism, exploitation, and oppression taking place within the food system. So the first is Los Angeles-based artist Lauren Halsey's organization Summa Everything, which distributed fresh produce to the residents of the South Central Los Angeles and Watts neighborhoods, and was particularly important in 2020 during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's Lauren Halsey here. And then the second project I wanted to mention is the filmmaker, curator, and artist, a polymath really, Linda Good Bryant. Her nonprofit Project Eats, which was founded in 2009, so it's been around for a while, also distributes fresh produce grown from its own urban farms in New York City. Project Eats continues to serve communities experiencing food insecurity through small plot, high-yield farms. Its goal is to increase the access and consumption of locally grown, healthy, affordable food in food insecure communities in New York City and beyond.
I think it's so inspiring to see what Linda is doing because it's such a direct lineage from what Agnes was trying to kind of call out. There, folks who have participated or attended our conversations I've shared in the past, as I've introduced Agnes's Wheatfield a confrontation that she has described it as being about food, energy, commerce, world trade, economics, mismanagement, waste, world hunger, and ecological concerns. It was an intrusion into the citadel, a confrontation of high civilization. Then again, it was Shangri-La, a small paradise, one's childhood, a hot summer afternoon in the country, peace, forgotten values, and simple pleasures. And I'm always struck by the power of Agnes's work because these are both issues that we're still contending with 40 years later and ideals that we're all trying to achieve in this amount of time. And when I think about the decision made to value the land, the small plot of land that we have at Tinworks to steward, and the opportunity to manifest Agnes's work as she has renamed it, an inspiration, and the opportunity to bring a community together to think about all of these issues, value of the land, but also to participate in planting wheat in solidarity in any fallow piece of land. And there are so many remarkable ways that this work connects with conversations I've had just in the not even a year that I've been in Bozeman. But I'm curious, Agnes's that image of Agnes in the Wheatfield has lived in my mind for decades now. When I first moved to New York in the late 90s and was involved in alternative art spaces, this image is so powerful for what an artist does, the kind of juxtaposition of unlikely things and where artists take us. Folks who know me know I always say artists take us to places we can't get to on our own. And so the potential of artists to reimagine spaces and places, Agnes was so iconic in my mind. So I'm curious how you first came to Agnes's work, and was it through Wheatfield or was it through another work?
I mean, I definitely had a land art class as an undergrad. I went to New College of Florida, and I had an amazing person who taught this class. And I remember there was a survey, and I learned about her work. But it was interesting that when I moved to New York, and I started to read her. I started to read her books. I went to a local bookstore, found this beautifully designed book, fell in love with the writing, wanted to read more of the writing, and ended up on her website, which is full of writing. Love the writing. And then, started to research again. The images are so iconic. I mean, she thought deeply about how this work could be, as an image, how to make an image that would burn into our memory, like you say. And I think she thought a lot about that. On top of everything else she was managing when she was doing this project, she definitely thought about the imagery. With the Twin Towers in the back, it's haunting. And so like that, that was there too. So it's always been kind of like the image, but also the writing has been there for me. I often think about Agnes more as a writer even, and maybe that's because I'm a writer, but I see her, the poetry, the writing, the artwork, it's all of a piece. It's but hard to put a label on her at all. You really can't. That's what Helen Cotter was trying to get at. I think I came to her through the typical routes of art history, but really there was like a good decade there where I was really more interested in her as a writer, almost like as an experimental writer.
And I think, again, great art is timeless. I think one of the remarkable things about Agnes's work, her artwork, but also her writing, and to plug, you can buy it in the lobby after we're done. The Country Bookshelf is selling Agnes's writing, The Human Argument, the writings of Agnes Denes. I am struck every time I read her writing of how timely, it's both timeless, unfortunately, but timely. And she's writing about technology, she's writing about artificial intelligence in the 70s in the way that is unfortunate, it is what it is, unfortunate or not, manifest now. Her remarkable ability to pull through so many different disciplines of philosophy and religion and science and pull it together not just in words, which are incredibly powerful, but also through artworks. And earlier tonight we were talking about to your point of the images that she has chosen as an artist to represent. So there's also a body of work that resulted out of the Wheatfield of photographs that she took. We have circulated some of those images of the juxtaposition facing the other way of the Statue of Liberty. So these two iconic American, the amber waves of grain and this Statue of Liberty, but also, as you were saying earlier, her photographic practice of documenting all the living things that came out in Wheatfield. I don't know if you want to...
She would get right down into the wheat, and there are these photographs of the ladybugs and the grasshoppers, and just incredible. And that speaks to her, the way that she thinks vertically and horizontally. And I mean, she's such a mind. And much of it is, like, as many artists, very kind of self-taught. But of course, this is before Google. I mean, now we have many artists who are very research-heavy artists, but they love Google. Agnes was deep in the library, spent most of her time researching, in university libraries. Even if she wasn't taking classes, I think her husband might have taught somewhere, and she had access. So yes, like, just, the way her mind works, it's hard to, really, I can't understand myself sometimes, but like, I think what you're talking about earlier with the writing, also, she was, most people say she was prescient, and everything was, she was always ahead of the curve. So she was one of the first artists to work with computers. She was in a very early exhibition, I think it was 1968, at the Jewish Museum in New York, that was about digital art before it was called this. And she worked with a computer programmer to create what was called the Triagonal Ballet, I think that work is called. And what was interesting about that was that the software, or maybe it was the computers, broke down, and so the work wasn't really realized. And there was a bunch of letters in Artforum later about this. There was, like, she thought, there was some sexism because it was all men in the show, and their works all came out perfectly, but hers melted down. But yeah, I mean, she was just always ahead of the curve, always working on things before other people really were.
Well, and that is a force she has contended with. She herself has made the distinction between a sort of gendered approach to land art, that she makes the distinction. It was a lot of those guys going and superimposing their will on the land, but she feels her practice from either describing it as an ecological perspective or regenerative. And it's also her word choice when she talks about planting paradoxes. Well, I think that was Lucy Lepard described in the article that she wrote, or the essay she wrote, or the way she talked in the context of this, in the project at Tinworks, that she's planting hope. You know, she has such faith, as much as we screw things up as humans, she has such faith in our ability to solve these problems creatively, and it's an optimistic point of view in that surely we can, with all of our capacities and capabilities, we can come together and solve these problems.
Yeah,
but
that was why that was why she would do the law aspect of it. Like, you know, that no one can touch Tree Mountain for 400 years. She believes over time that humans will get it right and be able to repair that site, which was, you know, really destroyed. The project suffered for many years. The trees didn't grow. It was a lot of, you know, it really took the community to like come back and maintain it. And now it's finally doing well. But yeah, she's hopeful, but she uses legal systems to make that possible too.
To superimpose her will in certain ways. But the generative aspect of it, I don't know if you want to talk about the first work, Tree Rice Burial, which preceded Wheatfield, and that was really her first kind of substantial work with the land. Do you want to
Yeah, and that comes out of the poetry practice. So she was writing a lot then, and this is when she started to bury time capsules in the ground as well with her poetry and with artifacts, objects from the time. But that was the first time she worked with seeds, which was important. The work, and again with that work, you know, I didn't back up that far, but the images of that work are, again, also very iconic. And she thought very much about how the piece should be documented, how it could live on beyond, you know, the one instance of it when it grows or when it happens. So, like, you know, always ahead of the curve, thinking about how to document a specific performance, which was happening near Niagara Falls and was, you know, ephemeral. It happened in the, you know, quickly. But the photographs of that are really beautiful. She chained herself to a tree. I mean, some of her, that really early work from the, you know, like 67 time, it's not my favorite, I have to say. This is when it hits the, you know, everything I want in terms of activism. It does something. It's like, it's trying to move, you know, not just a conversation forward, but it's, you know, these are seeds, go plant them. I'm going to put them in this show and have them distributed all over the world. People did, from what I understand, people did take the seeds and plant them all over the world. So this is, for me, the more I like this work more. But definitely the rice seed burial project is important.
Well, and the challenge of that, because the land that was planted in had environmental issues, and so the seeds came out, I think, kind of like there were, I don't know how to describe, they were not healthy seeds. You know, there were chemicals in the soil that prevented that from growing, and it's, you know, for anyone who spent more than 2 minutes with me recently, I'm like, oh my God, we're growing a wheat field, and how we're tending this as an artwork, as somebody who's put art shows together or partnered with artists, like the commitment to this. Even tonight at dinner, I was talking with Mary, and Mary reminded me, you know, you could have a hailstorm that takes out the artwork. I mean, we're still so much in the process of what it means to complete this work. And even Agnes, as she described, I mean, all of that in the background is all the rubble that they pulled out of this field to try and get 2 acres that could grow something. And there are other images of it. We include in the exhibition at Tinworks on View that just opened on Saturday, of kind of a digital slideshow of many of Agnes's work, and there's an image she took that is of the rubble that this was planted in, with the Statue of Liberty in the background, and then you see this, what has grown with the Statue of Liberty in the background. And she isn't always specific about some of the kind of data about this, but we know 2 acres of wheat, but the phenomenal labor it took. I mean, you had, I think we'd read some of the hand furrows and what was planted there, but she didn't have any money to pay the volunteers. She talks a lot about she would go home after 10 or 12 hours tending the field and make sandwiches for the volunteers just to be able to thank them and keep them involved. I will plug this. Please join us in tending our wheat field. We have a lot of weeds in our wheat field. Some of you in the audience have already been a part of the art by helping us tend it. It is a phenomenal amount of labor, and we don't even have 2 acres. And it's been so interesting also in our partnerships with our friends that Mary connected us to, specifically Mac Burgess in the Department of Plant Sciences at MSU. You know, these are people who are researching wheat, and that's part of their research and will be their livelihood, and how removed from the labor it takes, the manual labor that we once all depended on to produce a substantial food source like this. And it is such a, again, I leave it to Agnes. I mean, our farmer friends are also like, yes, it takes a lot to maintain a field of wheat. That's not a big deal. For me, it is as an artwork, and the responsibility of it is such a different calibration. But I think, are there other works in terms of, to bring it back to like food and activism? I mean, I think of this, of Agnes as such an earlier proponent of this, but other artists who are thinking about food and food systems.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, so, yeah, I mean, I fast forwarded, to the most recent work that I had been tracking, in LA with Summa Everything in 2020, and Linda Goodbryan has been doing it for a long time. I mean, maybe you all have ideas. I don't. Do you? Oh, okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. They were doing food stuff?
They were doing, actually, I was going to ask this in the question section, but now that I'm just jumping one of the things that strikes me about this project, and you said it a few times, is how it's rooted in the photographic and the way that the images circulate versus the kind of ongoingness of the other examples that you gave of the Lauren Halsey or the Linda Goodbryan or Bonnie Shark, who built a farm under a freeway, of those early examples of ecofeminism that were really rooted in these kind of less image, y'all use the word iconic, less iconic projects. And when I tend to think of this piece, I tend to think of the bulk of its meaning coming from its location. And so
Yeah.
I wonder how you think about sight in this context, and how it might, where in the arc of where exactly in the arc of environmental art does it belong? Because to me, in some ways, its iconicness puts it right there with somebody like Robert Simpson.
Yeah. Oh, and she's constantly compared. This work is compared to Spiral Jetty all the time. But they're so different.
Right?
Yeah.
Like he understood medium.
Yeah.
Medium.
Yeah.
And Bonnie Shark didn't, which is why she's not in the New York Times, right? There's a, I don't know. There's something in there that is so much about the image that makes it feel like it's a little bit a part of a slightly different history, and but also that it makes the curatorial part of it really important, right? Like where it goes. So like I wonder, I don't know, Jenny, if you want to talk about like how you think about the shift in location and the change of meaning that creates.
Well, Agnes accepted the invitation because of the opportunity to, I'm a little hesitant, maybe I'd say because it was an inspiration, but kind of celebrate the fact that in this case, when I told her what Tinworks was doing, where, if folks know the history of Tinworks, starting doing programming in 2019 in this site that was this complex of buildings and land that was slated to be developed. And instead, the art took hold and the artists and the energy there. And so the commitment in 2022 to the complex of buildings that we're still programming and that substantial piece of land, because an acre in Bozeman is a substantial piece of land, particularly these days, that it would be dedicated to artists and their presence. And when I also described the dynamics of the Northeast neighborhood, that as I see it as this horizontal, and especially at the Tinworks site, where you get this stacking, this horizontal stacking of, you have this field, you have this concrete pad, you have these low-slung industrial buildings, behind, that are backed by the foothills and then the mountains. And to me, that is so much the character of that neighborhood of Bozeman that is rapidly changing. And in 2 to 5 years, if you're standing in what had been the Wheatfield, you will look and see higher rise up to 5-story tall developments. But this land will be valued because of the opportunity to bring artists and center art in this neighborhood, in this place and time of change. And she was like, that's fantastic. I will yes. Like, she'd never been to Montana. And we did discuss, is it a little too obvious to do a wheat field in Montana? But as we are losing agricultural land in the Gallatin Valley, and we're next to a former mill, I mean, that is the backdrop. And it was our partner, friend Kenny Van Dyke, when he came into town to help us seed the field with bobcat winter wheat, and of course the relationship with MSU and bobcats and winter wheat because it was drought tolerant. So there was a lot of intention in all of these choices, very much in discussion with Agnes. But even Kenny said, this is so surreal coming into this field that I'm planting and looking at this neighborhood, which at once was all agricultural land and now is residential. What became industrial is residential, but she was so, and has the presence of this mill behind it. So the context of it resonated with Agnes because in a way she kind of felt like the art won this time. It didn't in this case. This is Battery Park City. You can't go to this place anymore. It only lives through this iconic image. But to me, the power of it is it lives on, that Agnes is still considering these works, and again, for her, what was important is the inspiration, and noted the title that this work has become iconic and inspirational art historically, but the inspiration for us to come together as a community, and so to distribute wheat seeds concurrent with the project, not after the fact, which was an earlier, a part of the earlier iteration, but the invitation to the Bozeman community to plant wheat in solidarity in any fallow piece of land now, so that when we harvest our wheat field, we can come together and anyone who's planted wheat in solidarity can bring it on site, process it into flour. We're also really excited to be working with Wild Crumb, that our flour they will bake into bread. So she was so excited that it could go full circle in a way that the original Wheatfield wasn't able to. And that Tinworks wanted to do that for her as an artist, and that, again, still being very new to the community, that I thought, what a great way to bring the community together. And this is what Mary and I had talked about from the beginning of these conversations, of the opportunity to bring people from food and farming communities together to have these conversations, to think about these ideas in a way that maybe we can find commonality and community, because they're contentious issues. I mean, I will share that when Kenny was interviewed in Edible Bozeman, he shared, he is criticized as a large ag farmer for not doing maybe more organic processes or what he puts in the land. And his response was, I can't even buy this land. I lease this land. And then the next year it could be developed. So as a farmer, what he has to do in terms of what he's outputting to be able to farm at a larger scale to produce food for any community. And so it's been, I think for Agnes, the context of it was all of those things. It was the site of Tinworks, but it was the hope or the optimism or the faith that this community could come together to contend with these issues that, again, as I read, are still 40 years later issues that we're contending with.
Yeah, I mean, she really thought of everything. I tried to say this as a living generative format, so that even when this went down and, it was developed, I'm sure it was in her mind in 1982 that work was going to keep going, and it would take the right context and the right ask to then do it again. And, I think that might be true of many of her projects, actually. And, I think there are so many unrealized projects. The last time I saw her, she was talking a lot about the hundreds of unrealized projects that couldn't, no one was brave enough, or smart enough really to invest in her work and pay for, the initial paying for something get it done. And so I could talk more about like those projects. There's a beautiful one that she had planned for New York City in Edgemere near the Rockaway Beach area, but it hasn't happened. And it should.
Is that the forest?
It's called the Forest for New York. And it would be wonderful and solve many of the problems that are happening in that area, like long-term asthma issues and there's a bad, quality of air. It's right under JFK, the airport. There's a lot going on there. And, she had planned a really diverse forest of, native trees, and it hasn't happened yet. It wouldn't be that hard for the city to do it. But I hope they do it in her lifetime. But I do think, she's thought about these things as living and generative to happen over and over again. So it's wonderful to see it here.
I feel like we can open up the floor to, questions, conversation.
I was wondering, so limited resources, limited budgets, right, for projects. So she is putting the caveat, the legal caveat that 400 years is they can't timber, they can't forest or whatever. How hard was that? Like, what was the pushback? How long was the legal battle?
There wasn't a battle. It was from the beginning. It was set into the beginning of the plan. So it was when Finland commissioned it. Well, so first it was the mining company, but then they had to get the support of the government, and then they got funding from the UN, like I talked about. But that was in the plan. She had worked on that for like 10 years at least. So she knew that once someone was going to activate it, they would have to accept the terms of the legal agreement, that it could not be messed with for 400 years, because it was this idea of the first virgin man-made forest, which is like an interesting, almost contradiction, but it happened. Yeah.
And that she talks about the commitment to it is that it's passed down through generations. You don't own it, but you are the steward of it. So for generations of families, that is their tree that they're responsible for. And to me, that always goes back to her faith in us, the commitment to things and solving these problems, and the optimism, again, that like sooner or later we're going to get it right. We will get it right, she thinks. And when you talk with Agnes, who's 93, she wants 500 more years. She's like, I'm just getting started in what I think we can be doing together through art, and it is an activist practice. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that way it is to act, and it is a means to an end. I'm interested in that kind of work increasingly, and so I was very drawn to her particular projects that were a means to an end. And I think that that's somewhat controversial even in the art world. Like, we don't want art to be a means to an end. We don't want it to be instrumentalized. We want it to be porous and not to be pinned down, and but I am interested in artists who have done this kind of work, and many of them have. So yes, it is instrumental.
Well, and also to be clear, there was a long period of time where Agnes was not on a lot of people's radar. I mean, she might have been in a lot of art history classes, but through the 90s and 2000s, there were not a lot of exhibition or project opportunities. It really kind of picked back up in like 2010, 15, and then there was an important exhibition at the Shed, which was a retrospective in 2019. So Agnes is having another moment at 92. But there was a long period of time, and she uses the word neglect. There was a neglect to her ideas. And so as much as there's a resurgence, she's like, there's so much work to do. We still have so much work to do through a recognition of her ideas, and hopefully, more manifestations of her ideas and projects.
She talks a lot about how humans like to correct things in hindsight, and how she wishes that we would be better about not doing that. We need to stop thinking that we can correct things in hindsight, and we need to just move forward and do what needs to be done now. So, and she has said that for decades and decades. But I think, people didn't really want to listen to that. So, and there were many reasons why she was neglected. She, I always just say she was a woman, and she was doing this kind of work. And this was, mostly men who are, making land art, which we can...
Or recognized.
Or recognized for it, yeah. Right. And it was pretty exploitive, I would say, what they were doing into the land. And so because she was not interested in that, and because it was hard to put her in any kind of category, yeah, it was not that commercial either. You couldn't really put, she makes, the drawings are beautiful, and yes, those have gone up for auction, and she does have galleries. But yeah, there's something that's sort of anti-commercial about a lot of the work, and so that may have rubbed people the wrong way. I mean, the 80s in the art world was extremely commercial. So she wasn't, at the top there, like a Jeff Koons kind of person.
Any other? Yeah.
I was curious when you were talking about people picking up the packets of seeds and planting them around community here in Bozeman. Do you have any examples, any stories of people who have done that this summer?
Mary Stein and Otto. The Bozeman Public Library has a patch of kamut wheat seeds. Also, the choice of using kamut or distributing kamut, and I appreciate Abundant Montana to help us access those and be able to distribute those seeds. So the opportunity for people to learn about an ancient grain that is being resuscitated for its history and nutritional properties. So we have kamut wheat growing at the Bozeman Public Library Extreme History Project, the Anderson School. There are 3 neighbors in the Northeast neighborhood, a family-owned church, the old Lurkin mansion. They've planted a stand of wheat. So Angela Yonke, who's sitting behind you, has been fantastic in distributing seeds and connecting with the community. I think we're about maybe 20 folks who have participated in that. I got a text message the other day, Agnes is in Ennis, and it was a shot of like the packet of wheat seeds, and we're still trying to track back who that was, who took from one of our In Conversation series a packet of wheat and planted out in Ennis. So, and I think come harvest time, we'll find out. We have folks who have small scale milling equipment who are going to partner with us and bring it on site so that we can hand mill the wheat into flour to process it. So again, I would also love anyone in the audience who's got more information. This is such a steep learning curve for us. For me, certainly in helping Agnes fulfill this work, but as an institution, also just the responsibility to the land. I mean, now we have a crop growing there, and it's an artwork, and wanting it to be a successful artwork, but also purposeful, that it isn't wasted, that it wasn't just symbolic, that it actually went full circle to be food for our community and to offer the opportunity for people to think about what it means to be making bread, making food in this way. And we're still on that journey.
Well, it feels like you're well on your way because it's
Well, and that's another thing, I am learning the various stages of wheat growing, and so the opportunity once it's established to be able to cut a path, because that was another interesting aspect of talking with people about what it means to have a wheat field that's an art object, because I would imagine a lot of people may see wheat fields, we drive past them, but when do you get to be in it unless you are the farmer farming it? When do you get to be in this as she described it, just incredible place that is so evocative of so many things. So soon we will be cutting a path through the wheat field so that people can also not just see it, but be in it and feel the presence of it in that way.
Yeah, she was trying to make like a little utopia here, I always think, and it happened for New Yorkers for a very short time, which is so beautiful.
I mean, there are people, I've now met 3 people who lived in Lower Manhattan in this time who talk about, their energy changes when they talk about their memory of this piece, of how profoundly sensorial it was, and these descriptions of Shangri-La, paradise, one's childhood. To me, that's so also poignant for considering Agnes's own biography, A Hot Summer Afternoon in the Country, Peace, Forgotten Values. People really profoundly connected to the experience of this piece and a nostalgia for it. And there is a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in this. You know, when there is rapid change, there is a longing for things that were at a different time. But I don't ever see Agnes, that's another remarkable thing. I don't see Agnes being nostalgic about this at all. She really feels like it is a new work here, and it is for this community, and it is always, she's so forward-looking all the time. So that's also an interesting element to this.
I don't know if this is on. Just because you brought up nostalgia, I just wanted to thank both of you so much. I feel really moved.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah. I grew up on the North Side, and I currently live in New York. So this work is deeply nostalgic for me, and to see a Wheatfield planted next to Shaw's building, there where also my mom had an art studio in the early 2000s where Ghost Gangbuster Pottery is now. And it is like what it is called. It's an art district now, and it's really interesting to see it becoming that and to be stewarded by really fucking smart people. I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, damn, you guys are just like historians, activists, like women, like you're connecting people with one another, you're learning from people, you're connecting to land, and you're helping other people do the same, and it's feeling really good. So I want to thank you so much for doing that and for like putting together, I mean, a really educational thing on an artist. And I just personally can't, I can't emphasize enough like how important it is for me to learn about women like this who did these crazy monumental, like, who built dreamscapes in reality, and to see pictures of it, like the iconography of it, but also just the reality of it, and to have an elderly Agnes planting an acre of wheat on the north side of Bozeman on land that I definitely thought was going to become 8-story condos, $1 million condos, is just like, there's so much, what you were saying, hope. I have so much faith. I feel so like at peace standing there looking at that. So thank you so much. It's really beautiful.
I think we end on that note. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Lauren.